Jake Anderson, a 37-year-old man, works as a project manager at a major construction company in downtown Chicago. He has been employed there for over 10 years, and during this time, he has climbed the career ladder through hard work and dedication. This position provides him with a very good salary but also requires him to work 60 hours a week, often making him come home late at night or even bring work into the weekends. This job has become an essential part of his identity as the primary provider for his family, but is also a significant source of stress and personal dissatisfaction. His wife, Emily, is a smart and ambitious 35-year-old woman. Emily used to work as a lawyer at a prestigious law firm, where she had a brilliant career. However, after having two sons, Lucas, 5, and Ethan, 3, Emily struggled to balance her demanding job with her responsibilities as a mother. Although they could afford help from a nanny, Emily felt the strain between her career and family life. This led her to leave the law firm and work for a government agency that offered more flexible hours and more time to care for her children. However, this decision also meant a significant reduction in their income. Although their family's finances are stable, Jake and Emily lead busy and stressful lives. Jake often feels that he must bear a heavy burden as the primary breadwinner, while Emily, though happy with more time at home, feels she has lost part of her professional identity. They love each other, but the monotonous and hectic routine often makes them feel alienated from one another. Amid the daily busyness, one thing always stays on Emily's mind: she has always wanted to have 3 children. Since before they married, Emily had talked with Jake about her dream of having a large family. Growing up as an only child, Emily felt lonely during her childhood. She wants to ensure her children do not feel the same and have siblings to share their joys and sorrows with. For Emily, having a large family is a long-cherished dream. However, for Jake, 2 children are enough. In his view, they are already at a point where the balance between work, personal life, and parental responsibilities is very fragile. He worries that adding a 3rd child will shatter the balance that is already difficult to maintain. Jake also grew up in a financially struggling family, and he is determined to provide a better life for his children, including ensuring they receive the best education and do not have to worry about college costs, something he had to fight hard for himself. He believes that having 2 children will allow them to achieve that goal, but adding a 3rd might make everything too complicated time-wise, energy-wise, and financially. Nevertheless, Emily has never truly given up on her desire. Although their daily lives are busy, there are moments when Emily brings up the topic of having another child, often when they are discussing the future or planning family vacations. While Jake often tries to avoid these conversations, Emily remains persistent. She tries to convince Jake that they can manage everything, and that having a large family is important to her. Over the past year, their discussions about a 3rd child have become more frequent. Emily feels that they are getting older, and if they do not decide now, the chance to have another child might be gone forever. On the other hand, Jake feels increasingly anxious about the prospect of having another child. The burden of work and the responsibility of being a father to 2 children already make him feel overwhelmed, and he does not feel ready to take on more responsibility. However, despite all his worries, Jake still remembers the promise he made to Emily when they were dating in college, that he would be open to having 3 children. This promise makes Jake hesitant to continue rejecting Emily's desire. He knows how important this is to his wife, and he also does not want to break his promise. Since the beginning of their marriage, Emily's desire to have 3 children has been a topic that couldn't be easily ignored. Even when they first met on campus and hadn't started dating yet, Emily had already mentioned her dream of having a big family. She always envisioned a house filled with children's laughter, warmth, and togetherness. As an only child, Emily often felt lonely during her childhood. She grew up without siblings to play with, argue with, or share stories with. Her parents, although they loved her dearly, were often busy with work and their social lives, leaving Emily to feel like she was living in solitude. This childhood experience made her determined to provide a different life for her own children. Emily wanted her children to grow up in a loving and supportive environment, where they could rely on and strengthen each other, even when the parents weren't always around. To her, having only 2 children wasn't enough to realize the large family she dreamed of. 3 children, Emily believed, was the perfect number, not too many to become overwhelming, but enough to create a vibrant family dynamic. Jake understood from the start that this was something very important to Emily. When they were dating, he often heard stories about how Emily always longed to have siblings. For Jake, who grew up in a family with 3 siblings, Emily's desire made sense. At that time, when they were young and hadn't yet faced the real challenges of marriage and parenting, the idea of having 3 children didn't feel like a huge burden. In fact, he even thought that maybe one day he would want the same thing. However, everything changed after they had their first child, Lucas. Becoming parents brought a lot of joy, but also a much greater responsibility than they had ever imagined. Lucas was a bright and energetic child, always curious about the world around him. However, caring for and educating him was a full-time job that drained their energy, especially on sleepless nights or when he fell ill. Both Jake and Emily felt the physical and emotional exhaustion, and Jake started to reconsider the idea of having more children. To him, 2 children might be enough to create a happy family without losing balance in their lives. When Ethan was born 3 years after Lucas, their lives became even busier. 2 young children close in age required constant attention. Although Jake and Emily supported each other in raising their children, their roles still felt heavy. Jake, who worked long hours at the office, often felt guilty for not being able to spend more time at home. On the other hand, Emily, who had reduced her working hours for the sake of the children, felt burdened by the endless daily routines. Although Emily loved her children unconditionally, she felt how difficult it was to balance being a good mother and maintaining her own happiness. Despite all the busyness and challenges, Emily's desire for a 3rd child remained. She always felt that their family was not yet complete. To her, something was missing, something that could only be filled by the presence of a 3rd child. Every time she saw large families at the park or school events, Emily felt a strong desire to give Lucas and Ethan an additional sibling. She imagined the 3 of them growing up together, protecting each other, and having an inseparable bond for life. Jake, on the other hand, became increasingly worried, not only because of the increasing financial burden, but also because of the time and energy required to raise 3 children. He wanted to ensure that they could provide the best for their children, including a quality education and a comfortable life. Jake grew up in a family with financial limitations, and he knew how difficult it was to strive for a good education without sufficient financial support. This made him determined to provide the best for Lucas and Ethan, including ensuring they could attend private school and have savings for college later. Adding a 3rd child, according to Jake, would only make this goal harder to achieve. Every time the topic of a 3rd child came up, their conversations always ended in a stalemate. Emily, with all her desires, felt that Jake did not understand how important this was to her. Jake, on the other hand, felt that Emily did not see how heavy the responsibility they would bear if they decided to have another child. They both loved each other, but in this matter they were on opposite poles. Jake often felt caught between his desire to please his wife and the increasingly demanding realities of life. Every time Emily brought up the desire for a 3rd child, Jake felt more pressured. Even so, Emily did not give up. She continued to assure Jake that they could overcome all the challenges ahead. Emily also tried to show how happy Lucas and Ethan were when they played together, hoping that this sight would convince Jake that adding another child would bring more happiness to their family. Emily believed that although Jake was worried now, he would be happy if their family grew by 1 more member. For her, it wasn't just about having another child, but also about realizing a lifelong dream she had always cherished. Jake, although reluctant, started to feel that he couldn't keep rejecting his wife's wish. After many long and difficult discussions, Jake finally began to open his heart to the possibility of having a 3rd child, even though his heart was still filled with doubts and concerns. After weeks of intense and sometimes emotional discussions, Jake finally agreed to try for a 3rd child. Though he still harbored deep doubts and worries, he didn't want to keep disappointing Emily. Jake understood well that this was his wife's greatest dream, and as her husband, he felt the need to support her. Despite his fears about the future, Jake began to accept that their family might soon grow. A few months later, Emily started noticing changes in her body. She was getting tired easily, felt nauseous in the mornings, and suddenly had strange cravings. These signs made her immediately suspect that she might be pregnant again. Without waiting any longer, she bought a pregnancy test from the local pharmacy and took it at home. When 2 lines appeared on the test, Emily felt a surge of mixed emotions. On one hand, she was overjoyed that her long-held wish to have another child had finally come true. But on the other hand, she felt anxious, knowing that having a 3rd child would bring significant changes to their lives. Excited, Emily decided to tell Jake that very evening. She carefully planned the moment, wanting to create a beautiful surprise. When Jake came home from work, Emily had prepared a warm dinner, hoping that the romantic atmosphere would be the perfect time to share the happy news. Throughout dinner, Emily tried to contain her joy and remain calm, even though inside she was impatient to tell Jake about her pregnancy. After dinner, Emily led Jake to the living room. She held his hand tightly, smiled warmly, and said with great excitement, "Jake, I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant." Jake, who had initially seemed tired after a long day at work, immediately went silent. He stared at Emily, trying to process what he had just heard. In an instant, his mind filled with various emotions. On one hand, he felt relieved that he could finally give Emily what she wanted. But on the other hand, the fear he had been suppressing resurfaced. Thoughts about increased responsibilities, financial pressures, and even less time with their children quickly flooded his mind. Despite his shock, Jake tried to stay calm in front of Emily. He knew this was a significant moment for her, and he didn't want to ruin it. Wow, that's big news, Jake finally said. Though his voice sounded heavy, Emily could sense something was bothering him, but she chose to ignore it. For her, this was a moment of joy, and she didn't want to focus on anything negative. They both arranged an appointment with the doctor to confirm the pregnancy. A week later, they went together to the clinic for the initial checkup. The atmosphere on the way there felt a bit awkward. Emily tried to stay cheerful, while Jake remained unusually quiet, lost in his thoughts. When they arrived at the clinic, Emily lay on the examination bed, and the doctor began performing an ultrasound to check her pregnancy. What happened next was completely unexpected. As the doctor moved the ultrasound device over Emily's stomach, he suddenly stopped and looked at the screen more seriously. Emily, who had been smiling, started to feel nervous. Is something wrong? Doctor, she asked anxiously. The doctor gave a small smile and shook his head. Nothing is wrong, he said calmly. In fact, there's good news. I see 2 embryos here. Congratulations, you're having twins. Emily and Jake were silent for a moment. Emily stared at the ultrasound screen, her mouth open in disbelief. Meanwhile, Jake felt his heart race. Twins, Jake muttered softly, as if talking to himself. His mind started spinning, trying to imagine how their lives would change with 2 babies at once. One child already felt like a big challenge, let alone 2. Emily, who was initially in shock, suddenly felt an overwhelming wave of joy. She had always dreamed of having 3 children, but 2 at once. It was like receiving more than she had hoped for. Twins, Emily exclaimed with a wide smile on her face. She looked at Jake, filled with excitement, hoping he would feel the same happiness. But Jake's reaction was far from what Emily had expected. His face turned pale, and his eyes seemed empty, as if he couldn't process all the information. The financial responsibility that had been haunting him now felt twice as heavy. The thought of raising 4 children, not just 3, seemed like an almost impossible burden. Thoughts about private school fees, college tuition, and the dwindling time he could spend with his family made him feel as if he were drowning in a sea of worries. After the doctor's appointment, they both walked out of the clinic to the car with very different feelings. Emily, still in euphoria, talked about how their life would be full of joy with the arrival of 2 more babies. But Jake remained silent the entire trip, his eyes staring blankly ahead. When they reached the car, Emily finally realized something was wrong. Jake, you look like you're about to cry, she said softly. Jake took a deep breath. I don't know how we're going to manage all this, he said, his voice sounding tired and heavy. 3 kids already feels like a lot, but now we're going to have 4. How are we going to give them everything they need? Time, attention, money, all of it. Emily was stunned, not expecting Jake to respond that way. Jake will be fine. We can handle this. I know it's a shock, but we can get through this together. But Jake felt even more cornered. Thoughts about quitting his stressful job and finding something less demanding began crossing his mind, even if it meant he might not be able to provide the life he had planned for their children. The feelings of defeat and inadequacy made him feel like he was failing as the head of the family. I need time to think, Jake said quietly. Emily looked at her husband with sympathy, but also a bit of disappointment. They both knew this wouldn't be the last conversation about the issue. And even though they were at the same point in their lives, their feelings about the future now seemed so different. As time passed after the news of the twins, the tension between Jake and Emily became more palpable in their home. Emily, overjoyed by the news, eagerly planned for a brighter future. She began reading books about raising twins, searching for nursery decor ideas, and even started drafting a list of possible baby names. Every day she immersed herself in the euphoria of becoming a mother of 4, something she had dreamed of for a long time. On the other hand, Jake felt increasingly trapped in his own worries. The news of twins, which should have been a joyous occasion, became a burden weighing heavily on his shoulders. Whenever Emily enthusiastically shared her plans, Jake only managed a thin smile, pretending to be happy. Yet deep inside, the fear and anxiety never left him. Jake felt the responsibilities of being the head of the family were growing, perhaps becoming too heavy to bear. He wanted to provide the best for his family, from the kids' education to a comfortable home and quality time with them. But with 2 more children on the way, he feared it would be impossible to do it all well. Each night, Jake lay in bed with his mind racing. He imagined how drastically their lives would change. The limited time he already had with Lucas and Ethan would shrink even further. His demanding job, which took up much of his time, now felt like a significant barrier to being a present father. While Jake had considered looking for a lighter job, he knew that his current salary was the only thing keeping them living comfortably and preparing for their children's future. We can't possibly give them everything, Jake thought gloomily. Private school, college tuition, extracurricular activities. It will all be much harder with 4 kids, this fear gnawed at Jake, and every time he spoke to Emily, his frustration slowly surfaced. One evening, after a dinner filled with awkward silence, Emily tried to start a conversation, hoping to help Jake out of his anxiety. "Jake, I know this might be hard for you, but we can't go on like this. We need to talk about everything," Emily said gently, hoping her husband would open up. Jake, sitting on the couch with his eyes glued to the TV he wasn't really watching, let out a long sigh. "I don't know what to say, Em. I just feel overwhelmed. 4 kids? How are we supposed to handle all of that?" Emily, initially patient, began to feel cornered by Jake's constant negativity. "Jake, I understand your worry, but I can't keep watching you like this. We have the chance to have a big, happy family. Can't you feel a little bit of joy?" Jake closed his eyes and slowly shook his head. "That's the problem, Em. I want to be happy, I want to see this as a blessing. But I'm also being realistic. I'm only one person, and there's a limit to how much I can do. I'll have to work harder to provide for them. And that means I won't have time for them or for you. I don't want to be the kind of dad who's physically there but emotionally absent." Emily took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Jake, we can figure it out. I'm working too, even if my salary isn't as big as yours. We can make a plan. Maybe I can go back to part-time if you feel overwhelmed. It doesn't have to all fall on your shoulders." But Jake felt that Emily didn't fully understand his burden. "It's not just about the money, Em. It's about time. Time for our kids, time for you, time for myself. How can we be good parents if we're always exhausted, always stressed? Lucas and Ethan already need a lot of attention, let alone when we have 2 more babies." The argument escalated. Jake felt that Emily wasn't seeing the realistic side of things, while Emily felt that Jake was too focused on his worries and ignoring the happiness they should be experiencing. Neither could find common ground, and every conversation about their family's future ended in frustration on both sides. One night, the tension reached its peak. Jake, who had come home late from work, found Emily sitting in the living room, looking downcast. He knew that Emily was tired of all their arguments. "I don't know," Emily said quietly as Jake sat beside her. "I know this is hard for you, but I feel so alone. I feel like you're not supporting me at all." Jake felt stung by her words. "That's not true, Em. I do support you. I'm scared. I don't know how we're going to manage all of this. I don't want to fail as a husband or as a father." Emily looked at Jake with weary eyes. "You're not alone, Jake. I'm scared too. But if we keep going like this, we're going to fall apart before our babies are even born. We need to support each other, not tear each other down." That night, although their conversation didn't end with a clear solution, they both realized the importance of communication and mutual support. Though it was difficult, Jake knew he couldn't keep bottling up his negative feelings, and Emily understood that she needed to be more patient with Jake's concerns. However, despite their efforts to support each other, a bigger issue was brewing beneath the surface, one that neither of them fully realized. The next day, Jake felt a little more at ease. He tried to think more positively, though his fears hadn't entirely disappeared. But even as he tried to be more open with Emily, the tension between them hadn't completely dissolved. Like a slow-burning fire, their unresolved conflict was leading towards something larger, something they never anticipated. Since Emily's news of expecting twins, her relationship with Jake had noticeably become strained. At home, the atmosphere was often tense, even when they tried to communicate. Despite both of them making efforts to set aside their differences and fix things, Jake couldn't shake off a feeling that gnawed at him, a feeling he tried to ignore but that haunted him daily. Amidst all his worries about the future of their family and financial responsibilities, Jake began to feel another urge surfacing, one he had buried for a long time. This feeling didn't arise from a lack of love for Emily, but rather from the mounting pressure he felt at home. At work, where Jake found a temporary escape from the domestic tension, he stumbled upon a distraction he never intended to have. A new colleague, Sophie, younger than him and full of energy, had started spending more and more time with Jake. Sophie was 29 years old, an incredibly attractive woman with a bright smile and an attentive nature. At first, their interactions were just typical office conversations, coworkers talking about tasks and projects. But over time, their conversations began to delve into more personal territory. Feeling burdened by the problems at home, Jake found comfort in talking to Sophie. He felt that Sophie understood his feelings, his anxieties, and the overwhelming stress he was experiencing. While Emily was more focused on their pregnancy plans and the future of their family, Sophie, on the other hand, listened to Jake without making any demands. This created a sense of safety and comfort that gradually began to replace the tension Jake felt at home. One day after work, Sophie invited Jake to grab coffee at a nearby cafe. At first, Jake hesitated, but eventually agreed, thinking it would be just another professional meeting. However, their conversation over coffee quickly turned into something more intimate. Sophie opened up about her life, how lonely she felt in the big city, and how she often felt isolated despite being surrounded by people. Jake, feeling connected to Sophie's story, began to sympathize. "I totally get that feeling," Jake said, sipping his coffee. "Sometimes I feel stuck too, like I don't know how to handle everything." Sophie gave a small smile and gently placed her hand on Jake's. "Jake, you're not alone. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm always here." Jake was startled by her touch, but he didn't pull away. Deep down, he knew this was wrong. Emily was at home, pregnant with his children, yet here he was in a cafe, far from his domestic life, finding comfort in something that felt unfamiliar yet enticing. Sophie was giving him the attention he craved, something that he felt had been missing in his relationship with Emily. What had started as a professional relationship between Jake and Sophie had now shifted into something much more personal. Text messages between them became more frequent, not about work anymore, but about their lives, their feelings, and how much they seemed to understand each other. Jake found himself trapped between two worlds. On one side was Emily and their unborn children, the family he had always dreamed of and loved. On the other was Sophie, who provided him an escape from all the pressure and worries he faced at home. One evening, after a long day at work, Sophie invited Jake to dinner. She said, "You look tired, Jake. How about we grab some dinner before heading home? I know a great place nearby." Feeling the need for a break from the stress at home, Jake agreed. They went to a cozy, quiet restaurant, far from the bustle of the city. The evening was peaceful, soft music playing in the background, and Jake found himself relaxing more than he had in a long time. Sophie sat across from him, speaking softly about everything from work to small things that made them both laugh. After dinner, Sophie didn't head home right away. She suggested they take a short walk and enjoy the night air. Jake, not wanting to return home to the tension with Emily, accepted. They walked through the city streets, talking and laughing freely. As the night grew later, they stopped at a quiet corner of the street. Sophie, who had only expressed her feelings through words until now, suddenly stepped closer and hugged Jake. He froze, his heart racing. In his mind, he knew this was wrong. But the loneliness and pressure he had been battling pushed him not to resist her embrace. That hug soon turned into a passionate kiss. Jake, overwhelmed by his emotions, couldn't stop himself. In that moment, all the burdens and anxieties he had carried seemed to vanish, replaced by a feeling he knew he shouldn't have. Sophie gave him the attention and affection he felt he had been missing at home, and Jake, too exhausted to fight his feelings anymore, surrendered to the temptation. The next morning, Jake woke up with an overwhelming sense of guilt. He knew what had happened the previous night was a huge mistake. He had betrayed Emily, the woman he loved, and the mother of his children. But despite his regret, he had no idea how to fix it. The secret he now carried was slowly going to destroy everything: his marriage, his family, and even himself. What Jake didn't realize, though, was that what he thought was just a one-night mistake would spiral into something much darker. Jake finds himself trapped in an internal battle after that tumultuous night. As much as he tries to return to his routine, everything he does feels empty. While he attempts to support Emily and prepare for the arrival of their children, his thoughts constantly drift to Sophie. Guilt and the tension between love and loyalty weigh heavily on him. Emily, sensing the changes in Jake's behavior, tries to get closer. She begins initiating more conversations, hoping to rebuild the connection that seems to have frayed. One evening, while sitting at the dinner table, she gently says, "Jake, I think we need to spend more time together. We need to talk about all of this." Jake knows she wants to discuss their relationship, but he works hard to keep his expression calm. "Yeah, Em, I agree. We do need to communicate better. But we also have to remember we're expecting 2 babies. Maybe we could wait until things settle down." Emily's sharp gaze pierces through him, as if she's seeing deeper into his soul. "Jake, don't avoid this. I know something's wrong. I can feel it. Is there something you want to tell me?" In his heart, Jake knows that the time will come when he has to face the truth, but he's not ready to shatter Emily's world with a confession that could destroy everything. Fear of losing it all, including his family, keeps him locked in silence. Instead, he chooses to lie, hoping everything will somehow go back to normal. Meanwhile, Jake and Sophie's relationship continues in secret. They meet in secluded places, sharing moments that should never exist. Each meeting intensifies the passion between them. Sophie always knows how to comfort Jake, making him feel like she's the only one who understands the complexity of his situation. The guilt that once plagued Jake fades each time he's with Sophie, and in those moments he feels alive again. But behind it all, Emily's growing suspicions push her to take action. She begins to closely observe Jake's behavior, noticing how often he receives hidden messages on his phone. Worry gnaws at her, and she starts to believe that it's more than just stress making Jake so distant. One night, while Jake is in the shower, Emily decides to check his phone. She knows it's risky, but the need to uncover the truth outweighs the risk. She opens his messaging app and finds numerous messages between Jake and Sophie full of affectionate words and sweet promises that should only belong to her. Her heart breaks as she reads the painful words, realizing that the dreams they built together and the commitments she trusted have been shattered in an instant. Emily is consumed by anger and betrayal. She can't believe what she's reading. All the gratitude and hope she had for a future with Jake turn into rage and heartbreak. When Jake comes out of the bathroom, he notices the unusual expression on Emily's face. What's wrong?" he asks, sensing that something is seriously amiss. With tears streaming down her face, Emily looks at Jake with eyes full of fury. "Do you remember when you promised you'd always be there for me? Why did you lie? Why did you lie? Why did you do this to me?" Her voice is full of raw emotion. Jake, unsure of what to say, remains silent. "Shut up. I read all your messages with Sophie. All this time I've been trying to support you, but it was all to cover up your lies," Emily yells, her voice rising. "You've destroyed all our hopes and dreams." Jake feels as if the world around him is collapsing. He knows he needs to take responsibility, but the right words just won't come. "Emily, I'm sorry. I don't know how it got to this point. I never wanted to hurt you." But Emily can't hear any of it. Her anger has boiled over, and the weight of her pain is overwhelming. Fix everything? You think you can fix this after all that? We committed to this family and you chose to destroy it. When will you realize you've betrayed us? As Jake tries to explain, Emily can't listen anymore. She grabs her car keys and storms out of the house. Pain and fury consume her. As she drives, her mind races what's going to happen to them. What will become of their children? In her distressed and confused state, Emily speeds down the road, trying to escape the reality haunting her mind. But beneath her anger, a darker feeling stirs within her, a burning curiosity to confront Sophie, the woman who ruined her life. Meanwhile, Jake, left alone at home, feels crushed. He knows it's all his fault. He can't imagine the state of his marriage now, and guilt weighs him down. He knows he must fix everything, but it all seems too late. As the night wears on, Emily makes a rash decision. She resolves to confront Sophie and face the woman who has torn her life apart. In her mind, she wants answers, and maybe, just maybe, she wants Sophie to feel the same pain she's been feeling. With determination, she drives to the address she found in Jake's messages. Her emotions are a mix of anger and sorrow, burning brighter with every passing second. What happens next will be unexpected, and as Emily approaches Sophie's home, she has no idea that this confrontation will end in a way she never imagined. The courage she's forced to muster will change everything, leading them all toward an inevitable and devastating collapse. Emily drove her car at high speed, her mind in turmoil. Each second felt like an eternity as she imagined Sophie's face when they met. What am I going to say, she thought. Will I attack her? Or will I try to understand why all of this happened? However, one thing was certain, she felt there was no more time to waste. With each turn of the wheels, her anger burned more intensely. Beautiful memories with Jake seemed to vanish in an instant, replaced by deep pain. She remembered vividly how they planned to have children, how Jake promised to always be there for her. All of it felt like a big lie. And now in front of her was the woman responsible for the collapse of all those dreams. After a few minutes of driving, Emily finally arrived in front of Sophie's house. A simple house with a well-maintained garden, where she could see the light from inside. The quiet atmosphere of the night contrasted with her turbulent emotions. She braked and sat for a moment, taking a deep breath to calm herself before facing what lay ahead. Finally, with firm determination, Emily stepped out of the car. She wore a simple dress, but now it felt heavier. As she walked towards Sophie's door, Her mind flashed with ideal images of their life, a happy family, children's laughter, and everything they were supposed to live together. All of it now shattered, and it all began with betrayal. Emily knocked on the door loudly. Her heart pounded, each beat marking every passing second. In a few seconds, the door opened and Sophie stood in front of Emily, looking surprised. "Emily," she asked, looking confused and a bit scared. "Stop pretending. I know who you are and what you've done with my husband," Emily shouted, her voice trembling with a mixture of emotions: anger, heartbreak, and sadness. Sophie, who initially appeared cheerful, now stood silent, her face turning pale. "Listen to me, Emily. This isn't what you think," Sophie replied, trying to remain calm despite Emily looking ready to attack. "Jake, don't try to defend yourself. He promised me, and now he's betrayed me. He chose you, Sophie." "So what do you have to say?" Emily's voice rose higher. Sophie swallowed hard, feeling trapped in a difficult situation. "We can talk about this. It shouldn't have happened like this." But Emily didn't want to hear it. Her anger had surpassed its limit. "Do you know how hard this is for me? I'm pregnant with twins. And you ruined everything." Sophie felt the pressure, and unconsciously, tears started flowing down her cheeks. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I didn't know Jake was married and had a family. He never told me. I thought I was just trying to help him," Sophie tried to explain, but it all felt like an insufficient defense. "Help or love?" Emily retorted, her voice filled with deep pain. "You know, I fought to make this family work, while you enjoyed it in the most inappropriate way." In that tense atmosphere, the tension escalated. Emily tried to control herself, but all those emotions were too strong, overwhelmed by deep pain. "What do you want from Jake? Do you really love him? Or do you just want to destroy my life?" "No, I don't want to destroy your life," Sophie shouted, though in her heart, she felt the pain of the mistake that had occurred. "I fought for what I wanted too. And I don't know how all this happened. I never intended to hurt anyone." But Emily felt there was no way to calm the burning anger inside her. She wanted answers, but all she got was confusion and regret. With labored breaths, she approached Sophie, looking directly into her eyes. "If there's one thing you can say to me now, say it. Do you love Jake?" Sophie was silent. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and unable to hide it, she nodded. "Yes, I love him. But it doesn't matter compared to what's happened. I never meant to destroy your marriage." Emily felt her anger gradually subside. However, the pain in her heart wouldn't go away. "All of this could have ended well if you hadn't been involved. But now you and Jake have ruined everything." Jake, unaware of all that was happening, was at home, trapped in his own worries. He felt a wave of crushing guilt but didn't know how to express it. In the dark of night, he felt something was wrong, as if something bigger was waiting to be revealed. Back at Sophie's house, the argument between Emily and Sophie intensified. Emily felt her heart breaking, but at the same time, she also felt the urge to protect her family. She wanted Sophie to feel the same pain she felt. And amid that feeling, she reached for something from her bag, a small folding knife she always carried. "This is all your fault. You took everything from me," Emily screamed, her voice trembling, filled with deep pain and anger. She couldn't imagine her life after this, and in that emotional chaos, she pointed the knife at Sophie. Sophie, shocked, stepped back, trying to distance herself from the seemingly helpless Emily. "Emily, don't. This isn't the way to resolve this. We can talk about it." But Sophie's voice didn't reach her heart. In a highly emotional state, Emily felt an irresistible urge to hurt the one she considered a traitor. As all the disappointment, pain, and anger merged within her, Emily lost control. The following events happened quickly. In an instant, Emily attacked. When the knife touched Sophie's skin, all the pent-up pain seemed to be released. But as Emily saw the blood flowing, a moment of realization hit her. In an instant, the anger turned into fear and regret. Sophie fell, her gaze empty. Emily stood there, trembling, realizing what she had done. In an instant, all hopes of fixing her life vanished. Everything was destroyed in one impulsive decision. And as all of this happened, Emily didn't know how to face the consequences of her actions. In the stillness of the eerie night, the sound of Emily's breathing echoed in her mind. She stood there, shackled by her unexpected decision, unsure of what to do next. In an instant, the world she knew crumbled before her. Blood flowed from Sophie's body, painting the floor with a stark red. Emily felt her soul shatter, yet there was also a part of her that felt a strange relief. For years, she had felt trapped in a life full of betrayal, and now it all seemed to have reached an end. However, with that end came unimaginable consequences. Emily struggled to calm her chaotic thoughts. She ignored the voice in her head screaming to throw away the knife and run. Instead, she just stood there, staring at Sophie's lifeless body on the floor. In the storm of her mind, she pondered every choice that had led her to this point. What have I done, she asked herself, but no answer came. After a few moments of silence, reality began to sink in. She had to leave. She couldn't stay here. Emily felt as if shadows were chasing her, haunting her every step. She quickly turned and ran out of the house, ignoring the deep pain buried in her heart. As she stepped outside, the night wind hit her face, as if trying to wake her from her despair. Her car was still parked on the street, and with trembling hands, Emily opened the door and got in. She quickly locked the doors, as if shielding herself from the outside world. But fear gripped her heart. What if someone saw her? What if the police suddenly showed up? In an instant, it all felt so real, and Emily's heart pounded faster. She drove aimlessly, not knowing where to go. Her mind raced, thinking of all the possible outcomes. She felt as if the eyes of the world were watching her. Every tick of the clock seemed like a reminder of the act she had just committed. There was no turning back. Everything had crumbled in a blink of an eye. Guilt began to envelope her, but at the same time, a burning anger flared up against Sophie and Jake. Emily drove in an unclear direction, finally stopping at the edge of a quiet lake. She stepped out of the car and stood by the lake, staring at the still water. Its surface reflected the full moon, but there was no peace in her heart. She knew she couldn't escape what had happened. Every wave crashing against the shore was a reminder of the inevitable choice she had made. In the distance, she could hear the sound of sirens. Her heartbeat quickened. They're already looking for me, she thought. In an instant, fear took over, and she felt the urge to hide. But behind that fear, there was also a burning anger, creating an internal battle within her. Was she guilty? Did Sophie deserve this? Those questions swirled in her mind, but no satisfying answer came. With her body trembling, Emily decided to return to the car. She didn't know where to go, but she knew she couldn't go back home. In the car, she thought of Jake. She knew she couldn't face her husband right now. What would she say? What if Jake already knew? That thought lingered, casting a darker shadow over her mind. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. Deep down, she wanted to pray that all of this was just a nightmare, but she knew it was real. She reached for her phone and looked at the dark screen. For a moment, she remembered the messages Jake might have sent. He must already know, she murmured. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Emily felt the weight on her chest growing heavier. Suddenly, she had the idea to call Jake, but fear stopped her. What could she say? Sorry, I just killed your lover. The voices in her head grew louder, and in an instant, she felt hopeless. Finally, she chose not to contact anyone and decided to head to her parents' house. Maybe there, she could find peace and time to think. With that thought, Emily started the car and drove, heading to the one place she considered safe. Yet, as she drove, the thoughts of what had happened and what was to come continued to haunt her. With every second, her guilt gnawed at her more. Could she live with this? Could she ever get her life back? All those questions bit at her like poison, but in that moment, one thing was clear: she couldn't escape the consequences of what she had done. Emily sped through the silence, the sound of her car engine the only thing piercing the eerie night. Anxiety gnawed at her heart incessantly, with every passing second reminding her of the decision that had irrevocably changed her life. The road ahead seemed blurry, as if the whole world outside had become an impenetrable fog. She felt an overwhelming sense of alienation, as though she had stepped into a dimension unknown to her. As she neared her parents' house, childhood memories flooded her mind. She recalled the joy of birthday celebrations, the laughter filling the rooms, and the simplicity of life back then. Yet those memories seemed hazy, overshadowed by the dark shadow of her recent actions. What would she tell her parents if they asked where she had been? What would they think of her if they knew? Each question tormented her more than the guilt that haunted her. When she finally arrived in front of her parents' house, doubt overwhelmed her. She parked her car and sat for a moment, staring at the house that had always been her sanctuary. But tonight, it looked like a prison. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, and stepped out of the car with heavy steps. Each step toward the door felt like walking to a courtroom. What would happen next? She knocked on the door hesitantly, and within seconds, the door opened, revealing her mother with a worried expression. "Emily, why are you here?" What's happened, she asked, immediately sensing something was wrong. Mom. I need help, Emily replied, her voice trembling. As she stepped inside, she felt the usual warmth, but her heart felt cold. All those beautiful memories seemed to be a reminder of what she had shattered. Sit down, dear. What's happened, Emily's mother asked, noticing her daughter's tense expression. Emily looked at her mother, feeling the urge to speak, but the words were stuck in her throat. She feared that if she opened her mouth, everything would pour out like an unstoppable waterfall. After a few moments of silence, she finally said, I don't know how to explain this, but Jake and something happened. Emily's mother sat beside her, trying to soothe her. Calm down, Emily. What happened with Jake? Is he all right? Emily bit her lip, feeling tears well up in her eyes. No, Mom, he's not all right. He's with another woman, and I couldn't control myself, she said, her voice filled with anguish. Her mother looked at her, confused. What do you mean? What happened? With difficulty, Emily began to recount everything. How she discovered Jake's affair with Sophie and how it led her to this point. She tried to avoid details about what happened at Sophie's house, but each time she tried, the memory resurfaced more painful than before. Emily's mother listened intently, her heart breaking at her daughter's story. Oh, sweetheart. This is also hard, she said, trying to comfort her. But you have to know that there's a way out of this. We can get help. But Emily felt hopeless. What can we do? I've ruined everything. What will I say to Jake? I don't even know how to explain this to the kids. Anger and sorrow overwhelmed her, making her feel even more trapped. Emily, we all make mistakes. What happened at Sophie's? It was a terrible decision, but we can face it together. You're not alone, her mother replied, trying to offer support. Emily shook her head, feeling the weight of it all. But it's not just about me. There are other lives involved. Sophie, I can't fix this. Just then, her phone vibrated in her bag. Quickly, she took it out and looked at the screen. A message from Jake. Where are you? I'm worried, it read. Emily's heart raced, torn between guilt and anger. What should I say, she murmured, ignoring her mother's attempts to give advice. He must already know. Talk to him. Don't run from this, her mother urged. You have to be honest with him. With tears in her eyes, Emily realized that lying wouldn't solve anything. She took a deep breath and began typing a response. I'm at my parents' house. I need time to think. After sending the message, she looked at her mother, seeing the worried yet loving face. Mom, I feel like a monster. I don't know how I can live with this, she said, her voice filled with despair. Her mother took her hand, trying to offer strength. No one is perfect, Emily. We all make mistakes. What's important is how we move forward. We can seek professional help if needed. But as Emily looked deep into her mother's eyes, she felt a profound worry. Could she really recover from this? Could she go back to who she was? The pain seemed impossible to forget. In the oppressive silence, Emily felt the burden on her shoulders grow heavier. She knew there were no shortcuts to fix everything. She had to face what had happened, confront all the consequences of her decisions. Deep down, she realized that her life would never be the same again. She had to fight, not just for herself, but for her children, even though the future looked bleak.